Hey guys, Mr. Woodman here, back at it again with another one of these lecture PowerPoint videos, where I'm going to go ahead and just pretty much read to you pretty much what's in the book. All the information here in the lecture is in the book. So if you guys don't have the book, you guys could watch this, or if you don't want to watch this, you could read the book. You could do it however you want. Real quick, the only thing you're going to get out of these lectures since the beginning of me doing these is I'm going to go ahead and give you guys a little bit more context. I'm going to try to clear some certain things up and try to give a little bit more elaboration on a few of the like vocab words and a little bit of the stuff that doesn't really quite make sense. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And this one's going to be a two-parter. I'm going to upload this one. Well, today you get this one, and then I'm going to upload another one tomorrow. It's going to pretty much break this chapter in half. So we're going to stop this PowerPoint at the beginning of the USA entering the war. Okay, so we're going to talk about, in this video, everything leading up to America coming into the war. So we're really going to focus on just Europe. So let's get started. World War II, Lesson 2, Axis Powers Advance. This is going to be a cavalry going into Russia. And as you can see, right, just the complete destruction in the background. We're going to go ahead and get started. So let's get started with the learning objectives. Of course, these are for your state standards from the Common Core, yada, yada, yada. So these three things you're going to learn today is you're going to learn how to, well, I should say the two things. You're going to learn how to trace the course of German aggression and British resistance in Europe, describe the Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union, and then the next video is going to explain how Japanese imperialism and the attack on Pearl Harbor brought the United States into the war. These are going to be your key terms. The only two terms I'm not going to talk about, because I'm going to go ahead and send you guys a documentary that really talks about him in great detail, is Dunkirk and Vichy. So the ones we are going to cover in class today are going to be the Blitzkrieg, Luftwaffe, Erwin Rommel, always struggle to say his name, Lend-Lease Act, Atlantic Charter, and Hideki Tojo. Talk about the last two tomorrow or in the next video. So let's get started with the Axis domination of Europe. World War II lasted from 1939 to 1945. It pitted the Axis powers against the Allies, which eventually included Britain, France, and Soviet Union, China, and the United States, and 43 other nations. So remember that, 43 other nations. Unlike World War I, with its defensive trenches, the new global conflict was a war of aggressive movement. In the early years, things went badly for the Allies as Axis forces swept across Europe, North Africa, and Asia. So one thing I need you guys to realize is, like, no, there wasn't 43 different armies in Europe from 43 different nations. And that's not how that necessarily worked. A lot of people that, a lot of countries that were involved, they would do it, monetarily. They would send supplies. They would send certain things like that. They would help with intelligence. They'll help with spies and so on and so forth. They were directly and sometimes indirectly affected by the war. So let's get started with the things we're going to cover in this subchapter. Germany's Lightning War, France surrenders, Operation Sea Lion, England survives the Blitz, Hitler's New Order, and war in North Africa and the Balkans. So let's get started with the Lightning War. The Nazi invasion of Poland revealed the power of Hitler's Blitzkrieg, or Lightning War. The Blitzkrieg used tank and air power technology to strike a devastating blow against the enemy. Hitler would use the strategy to great effect. In 1940, Hitler launched a blitzkrieg against Norway and Denmark, both of which soon fell. Next, his forces slammed into the Netherlands and Belgium, and they suffered the same fate. Now, class, let me explain to you exactly what a blitzkrieg is, the act of blitzkrieging something. First, the Luftwaffe, or German Air Force, bombed airfields, factories, towns, and cities. Screaming dive bombers attacked troops and civilians. Then fast-moving tanks and troop transports pushed their way into defending, in this case, Polish arms, usually forcing them to surrender. So let's try to visualize what the Blitzkrieg is. So traditionally, class, when you're trying to defend your city or a town or a border, what you would usually do is you would make a perimeter around something, right? So let's say there's a city. Right, there's a city, and you're going to have a perimeter around it. So you're going to have troops and tanks and anti-aircraft or whatever around the city, leaving the inside of the city kind of exposed, right? You can't protect everything. So what the Germans figured out was, as a result of World War I, if two lines go at each other, a lot of the times there's going to be a stalemate. Now, what happens if there's a line, and instead of you going head first, you go over it, or around it, or through it? right? Not try to take it off one for one. And this is what it's going to be. What's going to happen is the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, is going to fly over the cities and bomb it. Now, what are they going to do? What are they going to bomb? They're not going to bomb everything, right? They're going to bomb specific targets. They're going to go ahead and bomb a lot of the factories that are important for production of different goods. They're going to bomb, important parts of the town, like the markets. They're going to bomb different factories. So things that could cripple a town or a city, things like bridges, things like radio towers, things like television towers, and stuff like that, that will cripple the infrastructure of a city. After the Air Force goes and bombs everything, the inside of that perimeter, the inside of that bubble, the inside of that city is usually going to be very chaotic. They're not going to know what's going to happen or what's happening. So instead of them focusing around the city, they're focusing everywhere. That's when the German tanks come in. The tanks are going to come in, right, hauling butt, and they're going to break that perimeter. As soon as those tanks get in there, it's over for whatever's inside that bubble. So what they're going to do with the Blitzkrieg is they're going to go ahead, they're going to bomb everything, right? That's usually going to break open the perimeter, and then they're going to pour in super fast. They're going to just completely storm, like a lightning war, storm inside of that's where you get the term lightning war, I'm sorry. That's where they're going to storm in that port of entry. And then once they're in, it's going to cause a lot of chaos that the Germans are going to be able to use for their advantage. And it's going to be incredibly efficient. They're going to use this so incredibly well. Of course, we talked about it before. They learned this type of wartime strategy in Spain. They do it to Guernica. So they're going to start learning how to do this against different cities of Norway and Denmark, and it's going to become extremely potent, extremely deadly. And the thing about the Luftwaffe, the thing about having a great Air Force at this time, especially this early in World War II, is that the Netherlands, Belgium, they're not going to have Poland. They're not going to have the Air Force to match it. So, if an Air Force at all, so a lot of the time these air raids, these bombardments are going to go unchecked, and that's not good because let's say you do resist a couple of bombings, right? And these tanks do come and they do fail. Well, since there's no one protecting your skies, they could just keep going and keep bombarding and keep bombing your cities until eventually you have to break the perimeter and eventually you lose, right? That's what the idea of a blitzkrieg is. Here's going to be a video here, guys. If you guys want, I'm not going to watch it with you guys, but you guys can watch it on your own. So pause this video, go back to the slides, open the video, and watch it. I went ahead and did that. There's a couple videos on the slide and on the next couple of slides that are really, really interesting. A lot of them are going to be taken from British Pathé, which was a newspaper at the time, magazine type publication at the time in England that recorded everything. They have everything recorded. They have a YouTube channel now where they went ahead and uploaded all this footage. So it's a lot of the breaking news, a lot of the real-time like observations of things, real-time reaction of things. And so you get to see what it was actually like, what people were actually saying as these things were happening throughout World War II and, of course, beyond. But it's going to be very interesting footage. And it's usually going to be, since they're English and England is getting bombed, you're able to see footage that, people like us in the United States, since we never experienced anything like this, something that will really open our eyes in terms of, entire neighborhoods just completely blown up, entire cities, entire parts of London completely just wiped out. So it's a very surreal videos to watch. So let's continue with Axis domination of Europe. World War II lasted from 1939. Oh, I read that already. Let's go back. There it is. Now, Axis domination of Europe. So we're going to talk about France for a little bit. The Maginot Line was France's fortification at the French-German border. Britain and France, anticipating a German attack, armed the line with soldiers. So France is going to do something bad. And, not bad. They didn't think it was bad at the time, but it's going to turn out to be pretty bad. Now, what is it? France's biggest issue, especially at the start of World War II, is they're stuck at World War I mentality. So we know that the Germans are, they're being more efficient. They're using aircraft at a much higher efficiency rate. They're a lot deadlier. The bombings is a lot more accurate. However, France, isn't going to have a very strong air force to begin with. And B, they're going to start using trenches and World War I type of strategies that are not going to work. We'll see why. Now, France surrenders. In May of 1940, German forces surprised the French and British by attacking through the Ardennes forest in Belgium, an area that was considered invasion-proof. Bypassing the Maginot Line, German troops poured into France. Meanwhile, German forces were heading south toward Paris. In June, Mussolini had declared war on France and Britain. So this is how Italy jumps into the war. He sent Italian troops to attack France from the south. Overrun and demoralized, France surrendered on June 22nd, 1940. In a cruel joke, Hitler forced the French to sign the surrender documents in the same railroad car in which Germany had signed the Treaty of Versailles that ended World War I. So before we get to the irony that Hitler does, Hitler wants to be a comedian or something, we need to talk about this. We need to talk about France. We need to talk about how completely backwards they were thinking. So they knew, class, right? They knew that they were not, France knew, I should say, France, who that's they. They knew that Germany was not going to attack through their borders, right? They knew they weren't going to do that because those borders are very fortified, right? Just like the Schlieffen Plan that we talked about in World War I, the German army is going to say, hey, well, why don't we go through Belgium? And they do. But the thing is, they don't go through Belgium, the area, right, where the French are going to see. So the Ardennes, right, this was the old border, right? This is the actual border between, right, France and Belgium. The Ardennes is going to be a very dense and thick forest with massive trees, right? Trees are going to be like 2 feet separated from each other. It's going to be like, you know, when you watch, you know, horror stories of forests and like Sasquatch footages and people lost in the forest. Think of it that way. It was huge. These massive forests with all of these very thick patches where, you know, tanks can't drive through there, let alone soldiers. So they're going to think of that as a border a natural border that's going to separate them from the German Empire. However, class, they don't take into account planes. They don't take into account just blowing up part of the forest so you can walk through it. Excuse me. And that's what the Germans are going to do. So let's go back up to here to the Maginot Line. The Maginot Line is going to be a very secure border. However, class, it doesn't matter if you just go over it, right? That's going to be the biggest issue is they're not going to send all their troops head on to get annihilated by all of these, right? All of these turrets and all of these, right? Sniper nests, right? So usually the only way to get through the country to France, I should say, is through this tunnel, right? Because all of this, if you try to storm this hill, it's a suicide sentence, right? It's worse than trying to go over the top of a trench. However, class, you could just ignore this. How? Go over it. So what are they going to do? The Germans are going to use massive ships, massive aircrafts, fill them full of soldiers, fly over the Maginot Line, fly over the Ardennes, and parachute troops over the top. And they're going to do this thousands of soldiers. And it's going to catch France off guard. After that, after they're dealing with all of this, right, the troop movement, now the front line is getting pushed down into France. The south of France, next to Italy, is going to get invaded as well, as all their forces were worrying about the Germans, not really paying attention to Italy, because Italy's doing its own thing in Africa. Italy's going to mobilize all of its troops, and they're going to invade towards the south. So they're going to be going north. So quickly but surely, they're going to go inside of France. They're going to capture France, and France is going to surrender. Right, class, as a joke, because he thinks he's funny, Hitler made the French in the same railroad car, in the same table, with the same pen, on the same paper, not paper, but you know what I mean? They made them do the same thing they made the Germans do at the end of World War I, right? That's how much hate and disdain the Germans had towards the French. And that's how much hate and disdain they had towards the Treaty of Versailles. That's how much they felt that it was, you know, that negative to them. So we're going to go ahead and move on to Operation Sea Lion. With the fall of France, Britain stood alone in Western Europe. Hitler was sure that British would push for peace, But Winston Churchill, Prime Minister of England, had other plans. So Hitler's going to assume that Britain is going to continue the act of appeasement. He thinks that they're going to continue to say, hey, leave us alone and you can do whatever you want, right? That's what the old Prime Minister of England, Neville Chamberlain, was doing. But the new Prime Minister of England, Winston Churchill, had other plans. Faced with this defiance, Hitler made plans for Operation Sea Lion, the invasion of Britain. In preparation for the invasion, he launched massive airstrikes against the island nation. Beginning in August of 1940, German bombers began a daily bombardment of England's southern coast. So, Prime Minister of England, Winston Churchill, he's going to be a very, very important figure in World War II and just in European history in general. He's going to look at Hitler in the face and say, no, we're not going to give up. We're not going to ignore you. We're not going to give you whatever you want just so that you would leave us alone. And while England was formulating a plan, Hitler had his own plan, Operation Sea Lion. And he wanted to have a sea-to-land invasion. He wanted to put troops on and inside of England. But the first thing to do that was you have to make sure that the inside of that perimeter, right, we talked about now, it's a bigger case because it's a full island. You have to make sure the infrastructure in the island is destroyed. If they can't mobilize, if they can't go from one place to another, if the roads are destroyed, if their buildings are destroyed, if their communication towers are destroyed, if their bridges are destroyed, it's a lot harder to defend yourself. So what is he going to do? He's going to make sure that the Luftwaffe go in there and blow up whatever they can at all times. And they're going to concentrate mostly on the southern coast. That's where most of the massive industrial centers are going to be, massive factories, the massive markets and all that's going to be towards the south. That's where most of the people are. And he's going to target that area to bomb as much as he possibly can. So as you can see here, class, this is what Operation Sea Lion looked like. They're going to go ahead and just completely firebomb most of the cities, right? Most of Manchester, most of Liverpool, most of Merseyside, most of Cardiff, most of Newcastle, London, all of these cities are going to be looking exactly like this. Now, for a month, British Royal Air Force valiantly battled the Luftwaffe. Then the Germans changed their tactics. Instead of bombing military targets in the south, they began to bomb London and other cities. So unlike France and unlike the Netherlands and all of the other countries that got just taken pretty much by the Germans, the British Royal Air Force is an actual legitimate Air Force. They are going to have some of the greatest pilots alive at the time, and they're going to be able to fight off the Luftwaffe. They're going to be able to fight off the German Air Force not easily, but they're going to hold their own. So, frustrated, what he's going to do is instead of trying to take over, well, what happened? Let me go all the way back. What happened? There it is. So instead of bombing strategic areas of military targets, Hitler's going to say, hey, you know what? We need to demoralize them the way we demoralized France. So we need to firebomb London. We need to firebomb major cities. And luckily enough for England, they were ready for it. Now, England isn't, like we talked about, England is one of those ancient cities that have been around forever. At this point in time, they're going to have a very crude subway system. So they're going to have tunnels going all the way underneath the country. And the British people are going to use those tunnels. They're going to go underground, and they're going to survive a lot of these strikes, right? They're going to be able to kind of sort of take it on the chin, so to speak. So, let's look at this picture, how a lot of these people look like they're just going about their daily lives, right? Here's a mom with a kid in a stroller with another boy. These two people on bikes, they're probably just really, no one looks like they're hysterical. Of course, this guy looks pretty shocked at the destruction and devastation, but they don't look scared. They look like it's just another day. And really, right, class, in these videos that you're going to go ahead and watch, if you want to watch them, it goes more in depth of just the amount of destruction and the amount of spirit and like toughness that the English are going to have. For whatever reason, the English are going to be, as we've seen in World War I, The British are going to be, I don't know how to say it in a nice, polite way. They're going to be just tough. They're going to be extremely tough. They're going to be able to endure and witness monstrosities. They're going to be able to see their city, their neighborhoods, their towns, their apartment buildings be reduced to rubble, be reduced to nothing. And they're going to go, so what? What else can you do? Right? They're going to have that attitude. They're going to have that never say die attitude. That's really, really, really going to be very important in this war. So England survives the Blitz. The bombings continued for 57 nights in a row. Imagine that for 2 months, every single night, you have to go in a bunker underground. You have to go underneath into a basement. You have to go into a tunnel. You have to go into the subway to survive these bombings. These bombing attacks are known as the Blitz in London. Much of London was destroyed and thousands of people lost their lives. Right, class? Of course, a lot of people died. You know, most people survived. Most people were able to go into the bunkers, but not everybody, right? Of course, a lot of people are going to die due to the fires. They're going to die due to the asphyxiation, choking on smoke, and so on and so forth. However, London did not break under the Blitz. Defiantly, Parliament continued to meet, citizens carried on in their daily lives, and even Churchill and the British royalty joined the Londoners in bomb shelters instead of fleeing the countryside. This is huge, right? In terms of morale, in terms of imagine this, right? We're going through, right now, we're actually going through a lot of stuff, right? We're going through this quarantine. We're going through all this this unknown, right? Because we've never seen anything like this. Imagine going to, let's say you're quarantining in your house, right? You're trying to stay safe. Now imagine if you know the president's doing this too. Imagine if you know, right, all of these celebrities, all these people that you look up to for guidance are doing the same exact thing. Now imagine, right, everything's getting bombed, and instead of running away, the king and queen and the prime minister, they're staying in the same tunnels as you. You see them, they're right there with you. Parliament is right there with you. Your representatives are there with you. If that doesn't give you a sense of camaraderie, if that doesn't give you a sense of brotherhood, nothing will, right? The German planes continued to bomb London and other cities off and on until May of 1941. But contrary to Hitler's hopes, the Luftwaffe failed to get air superiority over Britain. Like I said, class, earlier, the Royal Air Force of Britain is going to be incredibly important and in really swatting down a lot of the Luftwaffe. Of course, the Luftwaffe is going to make massive amounts of damage, but it could have been a lot worse. British morale was not destroyed. In fact, the bombings only made the British more determined to turn back the enemy. Operation Sea Lion was a failure. Now, let's pivot to Italy. Let's talk about them for a little bit. In September of 1940, Mussolini's ordered forces from Italy's North African colony of Libya into Egypt. When the British army repelled these invaders, Hitler sent one of the most brilliant commanders, General Erwin Rommel, to North Africa. The Desert Fox, as he was called, chalked up a string of successes in 1941. In 1942, he pushed the British back across the desert towards Cairo, Egypt. So before we talk about anything else, we have to remember that Egypt is going to be a colony of the British Empire. So at the time, Egypt is sending a lot of oil, they're sending a lot of resources, a lot of food to, right, back to the colonizers, back to London, back to England. And so Italy and Mussolini are going to say, hey, we understand that Germany's attacking England. Well, what if we cut that supply chain? What if we starve out England? What if we make it that none of their supplies get to there? So that's what they're going to try to do at first, right? They're going to try to invade Egypt. And it's not going to work initially. It's not going to work initially. Why? Because Italy is kind of the forgotten empire when we talk about World War II. Italy and France are kind of forgotten and due to the fact that they didn't really fight much. Italy did fight, but they got a lot of help. So as you can see here, Italy's going to try to invade Egypt. They're going to fail. They're not going to be able to do it. Why? Because they don't have the generalship, they don't have the troops, they don't have the experience. England is just pretty much just going to wipe the floor with them until the Germans come and help them. The Germans are going to send the brilliant General Erwin Rommel, Desert Fox, and he's going to completely dominate. He's going to completely just toy with the English, and he's going to be able to back them all the way back into Cairo, into one city. Now, in October 1941, Italian forces invaded Greece, where they encountered stiff resistance. However, once again, class, German troops once again provided reinforcements. Both Greece and Yugoslavia were added to the growing Axis empire. Meanwhile, both Bulgaria and Hungary decided to join the Axis alliance by 1941. Now, the Axis powers and their allies controlled most of Europe. So, class, after their successes in Africa, Italy is going to try to say, hey, you know what? Instead of actually helping out, why don't we help ourselves out? Why don't we expand our borders? Right next to Italy, I would show you on the map, but I had to put everything away, so I don't have my map anymore. So right next to Italy is Greece. So what they're going to do is they're going to invade Greece, and it's not going to work. It's not going to work because they don't have the generals, they don't have the troops. Until the Germans help them out again. Once they get the German generals, once they get the German troops, once they get the German know-how, they're going to just steamroll through Greece, and they're going to steamroll through the next country, Yugoslavia. That's going to leave Bulgaria and Hungary pretty much by themselves, and it's debated for how much they actually viewed it this way. But a lot of people are going to say that they had no choice, right? It's either we fight and get steamrolled and we lose thousands of men, or we just say, hey, we'll join you, right? That's up to you guys, for you guys to look up. Because Bulgaria and Hungary are going to say at the end of the wars, hey, well, we didn't really want to join. We didn't really want to help out. But they showed otherwise, right? They actually did it. So now the Nazis attacked the Soviet Union. This is going to be the second part of this video. On June 22nd, 1941, under the codename Operation Barbarossa, Germany invaded the Soviet Union. It was the largest German military operation in World War II. German authorities planned to annihilate the communist nation. Why? Well, let's think about it. Why? What is the biggest fear Hitler has? I talked about it in the last video, in the last lecture. Hitler fears communism more than anything else. Why? Because it's a direct enemy, right? The idea of communism, the idea of everyone is the same, is completely the exact opposite of fascism, where it's one person has all the power, right? Can you see the difference there? One controlling everything, or everyone controlling everything, right? Those are going to be two radically different ideologies, and that's really going to be the stem of this, right? As a fascist, you don't want anyone else except for yourself to be the one in charge, and that's going to be the biggest issue. So not only does he want to annihilate the Stalin and the Russian Soviet fighters, but he wants to get rid of communism as a whole. He wants it gone, eradicated, because that's a direct attack on his leadership style, fascism, right? Being a dictator. So the Nazis attacked the Soviet Union. After the failure in Britain, Hitler turned his military might to the new target, the Soviet Union. The decision to invade the Soviet Union took pressure off Britain. It also proved to be one of Hitler's costliest mistakes. There's two reasons why it was a mistake. The first one is, says it right there. It got Britain off the hook. Britain wasn't getting bombed anymore. Britain didn't have to worry about sending its air force against the Luftwaffe. Britain didn't have to worry about an invasion. Now, when you don't have to worry about those two things, those three things, what can you do? You could fix infrastructure. You could start building up your army. You could start building up tanks. You could start building more planes. You could start building out a new navy. Hitler's going to make two mistakes here. The first one I just talked about, and the second thing is he's not going to correctly assume the Soviet power. Now, what do I mean by that? He's going to overlook just how absolutely massive Russia and the Soviet Union is. So these are the three things we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the rapid advance, winter halts the Blitzkrieg, and the siege of Leningrad. So let's talk about a rapid advance. Hitler unleashed a new Blitzkrieg on the Soviet Union. Roughly 3 million German soldiers invaded. That's a lot of soldiers. The Germans caught Russia unprepared. The Soviets lost 2.5 million soldiers trying to fight off the invaders. As they were forced back, Soviet troops destroyed factories, farm equipment, and burned crops to keep them out of enemy hands. This is known as the scorched earth policy. By autumn, the Nazis blitzed deep into Russia and were poised to take the capital of Moscow and the city of Leningrad, which is modern-day St. Petersburg. That's the second biggest city in the country. So real quick, what we need to talk about is that the blitzkrieg on the Soviet Union, the German blitz on the Soviet Union, is going to catch the Soviets off guard. They're not going to realize, oh, you're that fast, right? So they're going to be able to penetrate deep into the Soviet Union. And as a result of this, a lot of the cities, a lot of the smaller cities, a lot of the towns that were important in terms of manufacturing, right? Let's say, this town is known for making uniforms. Let's say this town is important for making guns. This one's made for, this town was created for making bullets and tanks or whatever, right? You see what I'm trying to say? They were just coming in and they were just taking over those towns like that, because they just weren't expecting it. So as the people saw the Germans coming and they couldn't do anything about it, they had to flee, they had to leave. So before they left, they burned everything. Why? Why did they do that? Why did they destroy their factories? Why did they destroy their farm equipment? Why did they burn their crops? Well, simply put it, they didn't want it to get into Russia's hand, right? Why would you give up something that you know is going to directly benefit the people who are invading, right? That's the idea that's going to happen. That's what they're going to do, and that's going to be called scorched earth policy. Now, it's important because it's going to do two things. It's going to keep the German supply low. They can't replenish their supplies. And two, it's going to make sure that they don't get free food. It's going to make sure they can't just stop at a field and pick up vegetables. It's going to make sure they can't go to a farm and slaughter the pigs and eat the goats or whatever, right? There's nothing there to eat. That's a big deal. Why? Because the winter is coming. Now I feel like I'm in Game of Thrones, right? Winter is coming. But there, however, the German advance stalled. Like Napoleon's Grand Army in 1812, Hitler's forces were not prepared for the fury of general winter. By early December, temperatures plunged to 0 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the beginning of winter. That's nothing, right, compared to what it is in February and March. Now, cold is a killer. German troops that set out in the summer had no warm winter uniforms. Fuel froze in tanks, and much of the German mechanized equipment was useless. It was absolutely too cold. Thousands of German soldiers starved or froze to death. So, class, there's two things here. The first thing was Hitler's army wasn't anticipating how long it takes to march from Germany through Russia all the way to Moscow. That's far. Russia is absolutely massive. So by the time they actually get to where they want to go, it's the middle of winter. That's terrible because now it's so cold, right? They weren't anticipating this. There's no food. They ran out of food. They ran out of, just supplies. They were just not able to do anything. They weren't able to use their machines. A lot of their cars would freeze out. A lot of the tanks, the fuel would freeze. As liquid freezes, it expands, right? As something turns into ice, it gets bigger. It swells up. And it was completely destroying engines, right? Because they just weren't expecting it. They weren't expecting to be there that late. And as a result, it was just deadly to the German soldiers on the front lines. Now, the siege of Leningrad, eventually, class, they are going to get to where they want to get to. The Soviets, meanwhile, suffered appalling hardships throughout the Nazi invasion. In September 1941, the 2.5-year siege of Leningrad began. Food was rationed to 2 pieces of bread a day. More than 1 million Leningraders died during the siege. However, the city did not fall to the Germans. Hoping to get some relief for its exhausted people, Stalin urged Britain to open a second front in Western Europe. Although Prime Minister Churchill could not offer much real help, the two powers did agree to work together. Russia and Britain came to a mutual alliance. Now let's get back over here to the food part. as they were fleeing, right, as they were doing the scorched earth policy, it's kind of a two-sided sword, right? You're making sure that the Germans don't get the food, but you're also getting rid of all the food that you had for yourself, right? So they're going to pretty much starve themselves out. Yes, of course, they're going to have, things that last like vodka. And, at this point, the reason why vodka is such a high commodity in Russia is not because it's an alcohol and it gets you drunk and it makes you forget about certain things, right? They use it more of a morale booster, but it's calories, right? The reason why beer is such an ancient invention, and the reason why wine is such an ancient invention, why it's consumed so much, is because it's calories. It's easy calories. A cup of vodka is as much calories as a loaf of bread, right? And that's huge when you can't eat bread or we don't have vegetables. So at this point in survival, your body needs calories, and it will take those calories wherever it'll get them. And vodka is going to be full of calories, right? So they're going to use that as a last ditch effort to keep themselves alive, right? And it's going to work. So the thing about Leningrad is I went ahead and I posted a video about the siege of Leningrad, and there's going to be a video of a woman giving her accounts of what she watched while it was happening when she was a child. Absolutely horrific. 99% of the city was burned to the ground. There was nothing left except for the people that were hiding in tunnels, the people that dug, basements. They were the only ones left. They were the only ones fighting back against the Germans. The Soviet hatred for the Germans is going to keep them alive, pretty much. The Russians, just like the English, are going to be so incredibly tough. We've seen this time and time and time again. You do not invade Russia. Why? Because the Russian people are absolutely bonkers. They're crazy. Right? So, hoping to get some type of help, Stalin is going to call Churchill and say, hey, Germany is concentrating on us 100%. They keep sending troops. We need help. We don't know how much longer we can last. So what they're going to do is they're going to try to say, hey, can you make up a second front? That way they could send less soldiers, right? So you have to remember it's Europe as a whole, right? On the east, all of the German soldiers are over here, and there's no one over here. Well, if you open up a second front, a western front, you're going to have to split, right? Because Germany's right in the middle of Europe. You're going to have to split your forces to fight on the two sides. And that's what Russia and Britain are going to come to a kind of mutual alliance to say, hey, we can't really do it now, but we'll try to do something else, right? And here's going to be the video of the horrors of Leningrad. And that's going to be it, class. That's going to be it on this version of this part 1 of the video. I'm going to go ahead and send you guys the second one so you guys can see it tomorrow to go along with your timeline and your schedule. Once again, class, if you guys have any issues with anything at all, please email me. Please let me know. I'm on campus every day pretty much. So if you guys don't want to email me, you guys could leave me a note on the door. You guys could slide something underneath the door. I'll see it eventually. Or you could turn into the office. That being said, class, I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye-bye.